Hey, what's up guys? Today in this video, I am going to show you the changes I had to make to accommodate the feature of calculating the percentage of increment in my load time, which I had shown in my previous YouTube live video, right, where I was actually making a HTTP call using the Laravel's HTTP client, and I was recording the time taken for the HTTP client to make that get call. And the idea was to have an average response time and then check that if the current response time is more than X number of X percentage of the average, then we basically send out a notification to the respective users informing them that there is a problem with the URL is loading slow. So in the video, where the live video which I did, I was able to create the entire logic where the service will detect whether the response is slower or not and then send a notification based on that. However, what I felt, or rather what we saw, was that the data was in float and calculations were not happening properly. After a lot of digging, what I found is that with PHP, it is best that you deal in integers or whole numbers rather than with floats, because then the calculations becomes quite difficult. Even for currencies, it is a better option to get rid of the decimals and put everything in full numbers and then make the calculations. So certain changes that I did was, obviously, let's look at these changes in the 7 file. So what I have done is, first of all, the URLs table, which initially was a float, is now an unsigned integer. I did an unsigned integer because I am quite sure that it is going to be 0 or above, but not anything negative, and that's why the unsigned thing. Similarly, the success table also has the time in unsigned integer rather than float value. Initially, I had this as float, and even the table, the URLs table, had average time as float. So these are the two changes in the migrations, and obviously one small change was I added this to my fillable. And then what I did was very straightforward. So instead of doing this round total time to 2, which would give me a number in float, what I did was I am multiplying it with 1000, because this is micro time, right? So what I'm doing is I'm getting the whole number. I'm assuming that generally it is not going to be more than a minute or so. That is the caveat. Otherwise this might become a problem. Let's see how things go, but at least for now I am multiplying this with 1000. Okay, and then obviously, because this thing has changed, these are some refactoring because time was changed to total time, and then I'm sending the time to the event. Okay, and right after that, once the event is fired, right, let's go inside that listener. Inside the listener, let me show you the code. Maybe I'll actually open that up. Right. So initially what was happening was I was calling a service, the URL checker service, and I had a method inside it called check URL load time. Now I had to modify this. First of all, I realized that the code that I had written was a little problematic. I'll show you why I'm saying that. See, initially my function name was check URL load time, which was being called through this handler. But then, from the single responsibility point of view, this service was doing multiple things. What was it doing? It was, where is my service class? Yes, it was first checking whether, what is the load time. It was deciding whether it is more than the threshold or not, and then it was also sending the notification. Now, the statement and sending notification is where the problem is. Ideally, if the function is supposed to check only whether the URL is slow or not, the notification should come from somewhere else. And that's why I did a very small thing. I changed the method name to is slow URL slow. Okay, that's kind of understanding that it will return either a true or a false. And if the URL is slow, if we get a true, we notify. So automatically then what happened is, let me now open up the service and show you. So what I did was, this function takes the URL and the time. If my time is less than or equal to average time, then we are good. So it is not slow. Is URL slow? The answer is no. Hence we return false. Otherwise, we move ahead. My threshold is 1.3 into 100, means, if the average is 100, then after 130, it should give me an error. So the percentage, this is how I'm calculating the time by average time and then by 100. So if my increment percentage is more than 130, which is quite a heavy thing, I return true, which means is URL slow? Answer is yes. Otherwise, I return false. So now suddenly this listener reads more easily, or rather reads well. So I'm checking if my URL is slow. If it is, notify on slow. And notify on slow is a very simple function which gets this user and sends the notification. Now, all this was possible because I wrote some tests. So if you see, some of the files which I made changes are, I changed the DB connection for testing purpose from to SQLite. Okay, I uncommented that, and the database is in memory. And then I have this test case. So let's look at the test case for you to understand better. So what is happening? I'm saying that it returns true when percentage is high. So if my average time is 100, I create a URL instance where my average time is 100. I create an instance of URL checker service, and then I assert true, that is the URL slow or not. I look at my function. What I'm doing is, if my increment percentage is greater than equal to threshold, which is 1.3 into 100, then I return true. So what is going to happen over here is this condition becomes true, and that is what I'm asserting. If my percentage is less than 1.3, right, which is like 129, will mean that it will not be satisfied. So at that point, I'm asserting that is slow returns false. Okay. And also I'm checking one more case, which is if they are same, even then I'm returning false. So these are the unit tests that I have written. What happens now is, it is very easy for me to test all the scenarios, because honestly speaking, right, testing this code through an actual API call will be very difficult, because it is quite possible that my URL is not slower than 1.3. I mean, it may not even reach the threshold. So how do I test whether the notification is coming or not? So these unit tests will help me. Why? Because now my logic is separated, and this part is again separated. So I can test this thing individually and be happy with the URL, rather the result. And then there is the separate function. Now this I can test as part of an integration, that if my response time is slower than this, right, if the average is 100 and if I get a 130, whether I am triggering a notification or not. So that's the change which I have made. I will link the main video, the live video which I did, so that you understand the entire flow. But at that point I did mention that I will fix that in a separate video. So yeah, that's about it, guys. This is what I wanted to cover in terms of changing the code, so that now we are able to calculate the proper percentage and send notifications when the URL is running slow. So thanks for watching. If you like this video, do click on the thumbs up icon. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And yes,